Hi everyone and welcome to today's session. I am Maria Harris from Digital Cat Consultancy, delighted to be with you today. Most of you probably know me from Atom Bank, where I was incredibly lucky enough to design, build and launch the UK's first digital mortgage. I've also worked in the building society sector with Leeds Building Society a few years ago and currently with Scottish and the Nottingham, so well immersed in the sector. I also sit on the board of United Trust Bank as a non-exec director, as well as South Tees NHS. So with me today, we have the very cultured and knowledgeable John Purpotney-Smith from Saffron Building Society, where he is Chief Commercial Officer. Welcome, John.
Hi, Maria. Glad to be with you today.
Lovely to see you as well. And today we're going to be talking all things digital tools for mortgages and how to meet customer needs. So do you just want to give us a little bit of background, John, on who you are and what it is that you do for Saffron?
Yeah, so my background is more varied in terms of I spent about half a dozen years in consultancy. I also worked for the Money Advice Service to help the UK in terms of financial capability and wellness. And then before that, I'd done a dozen years in mobile industry and a dozen years in retailing. And then in the last 18 months, I've been in Saffron as the Chief Commercial Officer, looking after all the customer needs and driving the profitability for the sector.
Excellent. Oh, nice varied background then. So yeah, congrats on the new role. Hope you're enjoying it. So you must have seen quite a lot of changes then in 18 months with everything that's been going on. So what kind of things have you seen in terms of changes to customer behaviour and how customers are engaging with you?
Well, obviously, the last 18 months has been a sort of generational shift in people's attitudes to each other and to house buying and as a nation through the pandemic. But one of the things that's come through really clearly is the urgency and clarity with which people want things. So I think you have a market that's really boomed after being closed for several months at the height of the pandemic, and then huge demand. And in that huge demand, you suddenly find that people are a lot more forthright in what is working and not working, either for our customers, which are the brokers, or their clients, or internally. So I've seen a lot of positive pressure through the crisis to improve things internally, to make services better, to use systems better. So that's been a real market change, step change in pace and focus brought about by the absolutely peculiar times that we're living through.
And did everyone moving to home and moving to online and this kind of Zoom Teams kind of world that we now live in, was that easy for you guys to implement?
I think we were very fortunate at the Saffron because the IT team had rolled out laptops to all head office based personnel in the January. So it was just great serendipity in the sense that when the crisis happened, we were able to mobilize people seamlessly to work at home. But of course, not forgetting that we had a significant number of people who were still coming to work in the branches and still operating. So I think in the initial crisis, then it worked well. People settled really well. And I think what's been amazing is how the business processes have worked so robustly through the pandemic with people working remotely. Now we're 18 months in. I think we're now, and the crisis is at a different phase. It's not with that, and we're not through it, and there's still significant risks. But I think now we're starting to deal with what I call all the C problems, so which come with remote working, which is creativity, collaboration, community, communication, all those things. We're having to find new ways to fill those gaps because remote working's been around for ages, particularly working in a global business, and these are challenges that you face. So that's probably the next phase we're in terms of helping people to get all their vitamin C's, as I like to call them.
Yeah, I like that, and I absolutely agree. I think the industry response from house builders, estate agents, valuers, surveyors, like everything literally like just people got on board really quickly with moving to what this new world looked like, and did it hugely successfully. As soon as the housing market reopened, everybody was put to the floor. I have to confess though, I have missed my whiteboard sessions with post-it notes and a marker in my hand doing the creativity, collaboration,
Yeah.
problem solving kind of stuff where yeah, you find the nicest solutions I think when you're in a room being creative. So I've definitely missed that. So just talk me through then, how have you adapted internally in the mortgage team so that your teams can still do that kind of really personal underwriting and that very unique service that your customers kind of expect from you?
Yeah, so I think there's a number of things we've done. Firstly, the teams have done tremendously well. I mean, last year Saffron had its best year for mortgage lending ever, doing over £250 million worth of new lending. And the way we've been able to do it is a very simple thing. One is to always make sure that we tell our customers, which are the brokers, a quick no rather than a slow no or a fast yes. So we've been very focused on the beginning part of the process because that's where their feedback is that where they want the most feedback quickly. And then I think the other thing is we've, you would understand, agile teams. We've created that more agile team between the intermediary sales team, the mortgage operations and the processing, and the underwriting team. And sort of said that underwriting starts in the first conversation, not when it hits the underwriter. And I think that's really improved the process internally, and that's something we want to do a lot more of because as a bespoke lender, it's the non-fitting customers that we deal with that we want to make sure that we get through to the underwriter. So we cleared a lot out of the way of things that maybe pre-pandemic had been hanging around and hadn't been flushed through the system, but in the crisis people said, we don't really need to do that. We don't need to do that. We don't need that document. Oh, did you realise this form you can't update? And people have been living with it. We're not putting up with that. So I think those are some of the things that we've been doing, and we've seen a good response from the brokers that we're serving. But obviously, there's always more that we want to do.
Yeah, that sounds like you've had a good opportunity to have a look at things while the bonnet's been up. It's always an interesting time to do something like that. And how have you adapted to the broker-customer relationship changing? Because obviously brokers have had to work very differently, and move much more of their fact finds into more of a digital format and more video call type things, and that creates risk challenges for banks. So how have you dealt with that kind of thing?
Yeah, well, firstly, I think that we can all be rightly proud of the broker community for the huge amount of work and effort that they've put in over the last 18 months. When I meet with brokers, and I've had the pleasure of doing that face to face more recently, you just hear the extraordinary hours that they've been working. I think what becomes really important is the QA aspect, the quality assurance aspect of making sure that you are really sampling the processes, that you're really making sure that you're following your processes through. In one way, a remote environment helps because the process becomes king because it's clearer because it's not all people in a room. You can actually see what's being tracked. On other hands, it makes it more difficult because you have to get that communication about changes to policies, etc. And then the other thing is it's just amazing how the crisis has broken down barriers. The idea of doing video calls for client broker meetings probably was quite avant-garde 2 years ago, but now it's like, yeah, of course, absolutely. Why wouldn't I do that? Why would I travel somewhere and waste all that time? So I think it has worked, but then you do need to put significant checks in place just to make sure that you are meeting all your obligations.
And are there any new technologies or any new tools that you're working with that you weren't using before?
Well, there's a few things that we're using with Experian in terms of we were looking at using open banking to help people to give an update on their financial circumstances, which we were using in the arrears space, which really helped and got good adoption. And then I think the other side is probably less in the heart is all the technology that we've been our IT team have mastered in terms of putting teams in, how we integrate teams into various applications to make communications, learning how to use whiteboards, etc., etc. So I think it's more on that side as well. I think one of the challenges that small and medium-sized businesses have, maybe in the largest where they have closed banking systems, it's taking time to take advantage of the digital dividends that's available through connections that you want to use, open APIs, etc., open banking.
Yeah, no, there's been lots of talk in the industry about APIs and connectivity, and I'm sure we're going to talk a lot about that in a little while. So in terms of the tools that you're using and those processes that you've changed, are you going to keep all of those kind of post-pandemic? Is that going to become your new normal?
Yeah, I think so. I think there's so much more we still want to do, because I think the I think what I've learned, is because obviously I've come into a regulated business and businesses that had different types of regulation, but it almost like all businesses, you have these deposits of sediment of various compliance regimes that build on top of each other on processes, and you end up with, why are you doing this? It's all 5 years ago, we've had a risk here. And I think so the positive outcome of the crisis is it's blown through that to be able to say, okay, let's think about what the member wants, or the customer, which is the broker, and then how do we fix that from the outside in, rather than saying, this is what we do, you have to fit with that. So I think it is here to stay, and it's definitely gained a lot of momentum in our business, that people are being encouraged to say, put their hand up and say, this could be better for the broker, this could be better, can we fix that? And I think that's here to stay. And then I think we're in the middle of a major upgrade with our software provider, and that is another opportunity to relook at all of our processes and think, how do we simplify this for who it's serving.
Yeah, and I think you talked a lot there at the beginning around customer expectations changing and the way that they engage has changed. And I'm not sure that we'll go back to the way it was before. I think there will be a new version of what this looks like going forward. And you definitely get the feeling that people have missed that face-to-face on-site interaction, but they really like the convenience of using Teams or Zooms or kind of digital tools that mean that they can do other things in real time. I think that expectation level's definitely changed. How have you found the challenges of maybe using some of these new tools or new technologies that you want to use while you still have kind of existing legacy platforms, not just in Saffron, but across the whole of the industry?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a general, for me, it's slightly frustrating because there are so many really good, best in class applications that you could use outside of your core systems. So it's a little bit, it is sometimes a bit like standing outside a sweet shop with your nose pressed up against the glass. Of course, well, I guess following the analogy through, not all sugar is good for you. So it's not necessarily that those things would be solutions, but I think it's slightly frustrating that you can't move from very closed systems to an open system overnight. But on the other hand, what I see is that there are different opportunities of applications that you could use, and we have used, like the Experian one, that can help your processes for the customer. And then I think in the longer term, it's key that the major suppliers open up their systems to allow you to add in APIs to connect to different parts of the customer experience chain that you might want to improve. So I would say it's exciting. It's great to have very reliable, safe systems that do what we want, but it then does take time for those to be securely opened up, which is some frustration. But what I've seen is, and certainly talking to our supplier and other suppliers, there's a huge number of opportunities coming up in this area, and there's a huge amount of interest. So I think over the next 5 years, we should see a lot greater adaptation of those things.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I guess from a kind of broad banking perspective, we've seen a real mix of approaches where some people have tried to rebuild kind of core banking systems. We've got new entrants who are coming in using kind of newer technology and newer platforms. And then we've got some people who've tried to adapt what they've already got and use middleware to try and kind of connect systems together. And I'm not sure that we've really hit on an approach that works at an industry level yet. It feels like we're trying lots of things and trying to find which one works. I
Yeah,
think that we've got connectivity of legacy platforms, I think, is really holding a lot of us back in the things that we want to do.
yeah, and
Yeah.
also it is a bold person who changes out of their system from their existing system. So that's a big move. Moving to a new system that nobody's ever knew, that's a big that's a big decision, and anything in between is a big decision. So there are big choices to be made out there, but they will shape the next 5 to 10 years because they are that type of decision for companies. And so it's exciting that lots of new vendors are coming into the space and there's a lot of innovation. And as the old joke goes, if we want to get somewhere, you probably wouldn't want to start from here. But we all are in our here, and that's where we've got to start from. Of course, if a total SaaS environment in the cloud, if you were starting today, and then the ability to layer in different applications would have some significant advantages. But then also, you've got to have the safety and integrity of the system as well. So there is a real trade-off for people, but it's definitely very exciting for the next 5 to 10 years, because the mortgage industry is probably ready for the digital transformation, because it has all the characteristics of a market that is ready for that type of sweep through of technology. But of course, it's the how and the when and the what which is harder to determine.
Yeah, and I guess I sit on the fintech side of things, where we've seen a real explosion of financial services fintech, because there are bits of the journey that have been quite easy to disrupt, especially in things like payments, instant credit, that kind of stuff. But the advantage, and one of the things I loved about a fintech, is you get to play and learn really, really quickly, but you can afford to make mistakes and fail when you're in an existing environment with existing customers and all of your regulatory compliance. That's not something you can do quite as easily. That's definitely an opportunity and a challenge at the same time. You touched a bit just on some of the emerging digital solutions and the fact that you guys have tried using open banking. I know you're playing with some of these tools that are out there. So which of the things that are emerging around open banking, artificial intelligence, machine learning, data analytics, where do you see the industry adopting those first, and how do you think the industry are going to use those tools?
Yeah, I think of the list of things, I think the not so much AI, but the automated learning, I think can play a quick and simple role in helping the underwriting processes, because obviously underwriting is broadly rules based and it plays to the strength of that type of application. So I can see a lot of interest in that, even for a society like ourselves who is more towards the bespoke end. It doesn't mean that you can't use that type of technology to get to the decision quicker and then have a manual intervention to oversee it. So I can see that side. Obviously, the identification process. There are lots of applications that I think are ripe for helping consumers get their information into the broker and then into our processes. So I can see those being adopted really well. And then I think in the sort of back end side, I think there are a number of different tools that are trying to tie together the arrears and collection side. On the open banking side, it's just really harder for me to see how open banking for a building society with a narrow product set and low transaction use relatively can use open banking in a way to help customers with other financial needs. I can see us being part of other providers amalgamating them, but I can't see it so easily. But it can be used, as we have used it, to help people income statements, and I can definitely see that growing. And you can imagine how you could upload that into the underwriting process. So I think there's any number of different things that could be done. And I think if you look at the most progressive developments in digital. You can see white label providers who can do the whole mortgage journey on a mobile, from soup to nuts, as it were. And I think that's to be applauded. And I think it'd be naive to think that that's not going to have huge ramifications for the whole industry, in terms of who is offering that type of service and the way it disrupts the marketplace. And for a regional building society like ourselves, who offers specialist products and services, that's still an opportunity and a threat to us, and then you have to work out how would you do that.
I definitely talk to my clients a lot about how we use technology to do all of that kind of heavy lifting and actually free up your teams, as in your human capital, to do the things that they're really good at, which is the value add, customer engagement, to do that like kind of real deep dive analysis on maybe one element of a case, rather than them spending a lot of time looking at documents or keying data between systems and doing the stuff that doesn't really add any value to your process. So yeah, I like the idea of using tech to do all of that heavy lifting to make the customer engagement easier, and using our team's specialist skill sets to do the things that they're specialist in. I think we see that a lot in other industries as well, like insurance or retail, where they've gotten really good at doing that kind of using machine learning or robotic process automation to free up that time. I like that. I'm really fortunate as well that one of the advisory roles I do is with a distributed ledger technology company, and we did our first mortgage on a blockchain a few weeks ago in a live environment.
Oh, wow.
Is that something that you think the building societies will start looking at anytime soon?
I think if it is, I think it'll be the major building societies in the sector who have the resources to be able to do it. But I think again, and I think for smaller businesses, I think it's just impossible really to imagine that, to understand the complexities and deliver it. But I think what again shows is that the barriers to entry into the mortgage process are falling as the technology almost climbs over those ramparts. And I think that becomes the big changing agent in the marketplace, because what you have is a market that was defined by high barriers to entry, because regulatory, technology wise, and in terms of the process, and a lot of those are starting to be broken down. So yeah, it's really interesting to hear people are doing that, and I think that's going to bring new competitors into the marketplace, which will revolutionize the market. Because I think if you'd ask somebody maybe 30, 40 years ago about where do you want to get your mortgage from, I think there would probably been quite a strong brand affiliation to your bank or your building society. But I just don't get now that there's that type of strength of brand affinity for where people want to get their mortgage from. They want it to be safe and secure, of course, but I don't think that brand equity is as strong. And as you see, we've seen in the transformation through the online supermarkets for credit cards, insurance, etc. People are willing to get the best recommendation and go with that and the smoothest process. And I can't see why mortgages would be that different. And then that becomes a real opportunity for the consumer and a real threat for the existing industry if it doesn't adapt.
Yeah, so my children are 24 and 18, and they've grown up in a world where literally everything is on their mobile device. There's nothing that they can't do on their phone, but what they watch and what they listen to is absolutely based on people like you watched this, or because you watched this series on Netflix, you might like this series. And that's almost how they expect their financial services to work. I remember taking my daughter to uni and telling her that she had to open a bank account and rather than being on mine. And she was horrified that she had to physically sign a document and take ID into a present. She was like, well, I actually have to go into a bank? Like, I've never been inside one before. Like, do I have to? And my son now is on a digital bank and he didn't have to do any of that. And that's just, they're only 6 years apart. So yeah, they've definitely got a very different expectation, I think, on what their mortgages and banking will look like in the future. Is cool.
So I was just saying, I just agree. I think one of the hardest things to do is to remember that other people are not like you. And as we grow older, we become more distant from those decades of when we were younger. It's not just the time; it's just their experience. And I've just been rewatching that Emma Raducanu going through all the rounds, watching it on catch up from her first round all the 10 games that she won to win that epic final. But what somebody described as being a digital native, using, like your children, using digital is not a second language, it's a first language. It's not I must put this onto this, that and the other because it's just part of who they are. And I think it's the problem for all industries is that they tend to be run by old people, and old people don't know what it's like to be a young person. So it's a real opportunity and a threat. And then I think that's where the listening to users and customers is really important, particularly in the boardroom, because we are not them, and it's naive to think that we know what they think. And then how do you adapt your systems, etc. And it's a big challenge for the financial industry, but it's definitely going to bring positive changes for the consumer.
I have to confess that US Open final was one of my sporting highlights of like the decade. I was so excited. I was like so emotionally invested. I'm delighted she won. So just on all of this new emerging solutions and challenges and things that are happening in other industries and tools that are out there, what would you like to see are either legacy platform providers or the new software providers doing to make it easier to get adoption and to make those barriers to entry just less than they are? How do we make it easier for people to use these things?
Yeah, well, that's a really good question. I know my IT director, Anthony, would say to me that he's seen more vaporware in the last 18 months about the opening of what technology will do, particularly from established suppliers, that he could build a house with it all. And I think that's probably, there are going to be some real serious winners and losers in the established banking systems market. People who actually have a core stack that is fundamentally open, and those that have a core stack that isn't, but they are saying that it will be. And then I think the market will decide who they think has the right technology, and then it's really a race to who can open up their banking systems. Because for every new provider, and I've seen some really good examples, and I won't name check them, but there's some really interesting cloud-based systems, and which I'm really impressed by. The truth is, they will gain traction in the marketplace, but it's the established players. There's a real race onto who can actually open up their systems, and I think the suppliers that do that will get a competitive advantage, and we'll see people swinging towards those suppliers quite quickly. I think the other side is that I think there is a piece of work in terms of how do you make so you have an open pipe and the API, but how do you make sure that all the standards are right in terms of who governs the standards for the APIs and the connections, because obviously we're dealing with people's money, and I think that is one worry that I would have if I was able to plug things into my core banking system. How do I make sure that from a regulatory point of view that all the checks are in the right place, and then from a GDPR point of view that I've got all those boxes ticked. So I think for application providers, I think making clear how they overcome those barriers, whilst in a way a bit of a snooze fest and not techie at all, I think is really important, because obviously we run serious risk based businesses. So I think that's something alongside the established players.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point. So the Department of Culture have recently published their digital identity framework, which is exactly what you've just described. It is a set of data standards, an API standard, and a technology-based approach to how we do identity checks in our industry. And the roadmap is out there now for the live pilot and moving to that. And that is a fundamental change in that we're going to create a solution where a customer does their digital identity once at the entry point, whether that's with their estate agent or with their mortgage broker, and everybody else in the chain will have to accept that that digital identity is authenticated and proven and standardized, and has to accept it as a trusted source of the truth. And you can't go back and say to the customer, oh, but we use something else, you need to do your identity again with us. So, what do we need to do to be ready for that kind of stuff coming? Because it doesn't feel like we're talking about it enough.
No, I mean, I've got a real fondness for digital identity. A few years ago, as strange as it is to say, a man in our village contacted me and said, "Oh, would you like to set up a digital identity business?" He said, "Because I think this is the next big thing." I didn't, because I didn't know anything about it, but I could, from the discussions, I could work out that there is this real issue with the consolidation of information and the credibility of that information, and that burns so much time in the process. So yeah, I definitely welcome what's happening, and I think those people who see the opportunity and want to adapt and able to adapt will really take advantage of it, because it can remove a lot of noise out of the system.
Yeah, and identity is a great one. It always makes me shudder and kind of wryly laugh that we do identity check at least 4 times during the home purchase process, but we still have identity fraud. So it's obviously not working. There must be a better way to do it. So I'm really excited to see how the pilot goes and to see it in practice. I also chair the technology subgroup for the Home Buying and Selling Committee, which is a government industry cross-working group. And they are looking at how we pull all of the property and customer data right up front to the point of a property being listed, using a buyer's and seller property information pack. And this is it's hugely beneficial for the customer who's buying the property, because they'll see everything up front. The seller will instruct the conveyancer at the point that they list for selling. So all of your issues that you normally get post-valuation will all be flushed out up front. So title checks, all of your kind of land registry searches, all of that kind of stuff. So huge benefits for the customer, but potentially very disruptors for us in the lending sector. So again, are we prepared for this? Are we ready for this level of disruption and for digital transformation, and to move to something that is essentially a data-driven process?
Well, I suspect not, because history tells us that everybody is surprised by technology revolution. I mean, I'm old enough to remember when I was selling mobile phones that Nokia were seen as the premium, unassailable brand in the sector. And you can't buy a Nokia phone now for love nor money, because it's amazing how technology change and transformation sneaks up on you. So I think that type of development is really needed, because when you link it to climate and the green agenda about what is this home, what is happening in that home, and how is it rated, and how is it taxed, is going to be incredibly important. And I think in certainly the little bit I've seen in the financial services industry is sometimes it's certainly the little I've seen, so I'm no expert, it's way behind other sectors I've been in terms of data analytics, the use of data lakes, the application of data. You can often tell the state by how many data analysts do you have in the business, and often there's not very many. So I think it is going to change it a lot, but I think all for the positive for the customer. But again, this type of shaking will mean that there's opportunities for new entrants who are able to see how you make the process a lot smoother and a lot simpler. But also importantly for the client, the customer, giving them added value, giving them information that they didn't have before to help them make the decision. But of course, if you're on the committee, do say that all that is all great, but what we probably really need is the system where people put offers into houses and they're binding. That would create a lot less noise in the housing market system. But that data pack sounds very, very useful.
Yeah, I think the data pack will actually enable that to happen. So part of the reason that's a challenge at the moment is that there's not enough data for the customer to make that informed decision and put a binding offer in. But if we get to the point where we can digitize and authenticate all of the data and the customer is like really confident in what they're buying and knowing what it is, yeah, I think that that's a natural next step. So yeah, again, good things coming. If anybody wants to know more about those things, please go and have a look on my LinkedIn profile or on the government website. There's some really good information there. I'm really conscious, John, that we could just talk about this stuff all day and probably like bore everybody else. So let me just ask you one last question and then I'll hand over to our next session. What is your favourite piece of technology or your favourite app that you like to use?
My favourite app. That's a really. I tell you. I know this is a sort of really niche thing, but there's an app called Steep Hill, and it's really old, and I don't know who produces it, but Steep Hill allows you to see the results of all cycling events around the world, and usually videos of the highlights of it, and it also does previews and reviews. And I have no idea who produces it, and I don't know. There's no adverts on it or hardly anything. But to me, that's the app that I really appreciate, because there's some cycling races you can't watch all the way through, and it gives you all the data and it's all written up and it's all connected. It's really old-fashioned, but that's my favourite app. That's my go-to app as a cycling.
That sounds really cool. Thank you for sharing. Yeah, that sounds cool. Thanks for sharing that. Thank you so much for answering all my questions. Hope I didn't give you too much of a grilling. Thank you to the audience for watching us today. If you have any questions, we'll pick them up in the chat. Otherwise, please reach out to us afterwards and enjoy the rest of the session today. Take care, everyone. Bye.